Welcome to Coming Clean, the podcast dedicated to common sense environmental dialogue, environmental optimism, and real environmental solutions. This show is proudly powered by Ørsted. Welcome to the first ever episode of Coming Clean. I'm your host, Benji Becker. And we are so excited to have on the podcast today one of my new good friends. We've been social media friends for a while, and unfortunately a Cowboys fan, but we won't hold that against him, Al Robertson. And before I let Al do a little bit of introducing of himself, I'm going to toot his horn a little bit because not only did he come and speak at our ACC Summit this past summer in Washington, D.C. to our 300 or so activists that were in D.C. to be there and hear about how our approach can solve environmental issues. But he also is, of course, the infamous part of the infamous Robertson family and helped start the Duck Commander business in the Robertson family. He's the son of Phil and Miss Kay Robertson, and a 22-year pastor, but most of all, an environmental lover and a conservationist, or most of all to me, at least, for this conversation. Welcome to the show, Al, and welcome the guests today, but also tell us a little bit about your love for the environment and why you're here.
Well, thank you, Benji. It's an honor, and I followed you. I think probably before you started following me. On
I think that is true, which is something to brag about, a resume builder.
Well, I was struck that you were so young, and yet you were so passionate about the outdoors and about the climate, and so that just impressed me. And I probably saw you on somebody else's Twitter feed, and so I started following you and following your organization, and I was just super impressed. And so we connected via social media, which is a great thing about, people talk a lot about the downers of social media, and of course there's plenty, but a real positive is I've met some incredible people, all around the country and the world because of social media, several good friends. And so it was exciting, and I really appreciate you having me into DC. And I will say this before I tell you about me. I was so impressed with your leadership, with your team, just meeting everybody. Of course, everybody is young and passionate, but at the same time, I loved it because they were also very caring, very open to people, and so I thought that was a really cool thing. So I did appreciate you having me. It was a lot of fun. So yeah, I am a Cowboy fan. I wore my Cowboy hat today just for, even though nobody can see it, you can see it. So I want to make sure you got a good look. I'll look for some Packer stuff to wear, but I couldn't find any.
Well, that I can change that.
That's right. You have to give me something Packer.
Well, I'll take you to Lambeau. How about that?
Now that would be fun. I was going to go a few years ago. LSU played Wisconsin there.
Oh yeah.
And we were going, and then something happened. We had an appearance or something, and we wound up not being able to go. But Lambeau is like Yankee Stadium, or just it's Wrigley Field. It's iconic. And so even though I'm not obviously a Packer fan, I'm a Cowboy fan, but at the same time, I'm always intrigued. And I love the idea that it's owned by fans, and just, the whole idea behind it is a really cool thing. I went to Yankee Stadium a few years ago, and because we know the owner's granddaughter, and we got to go up in the box, and I'm a Dodger fan. So, I've never been a huge Yankee guy, but it was like baseball royalty. You walk in there and you got Babe Ruth's bat and Lou Gehrig's glove, and, just all this really cool stuff. So that's one thing I love about sports.
Well, count on that as an open invite to Lambeau, so you can have some Packers stuff to wear the next time you're on the show.
There you go. I'll need to go when they're playing the Eagles or somebody I really don't like.
Or you can go when they play the Cowboys, and I'll let you wear your Cowboys stuff.
Okay, well, if you let me wear my stuff, I'll come. Yeah, I'm the oldest in the Robertson clan, as you said, and since I was a little boy, obviously we've been into hunting and into outdoors, but I've seen, there's nothing more beautiful to me, and everybody has their outdoor thing. And I know you do a lot of treks and, all that kind of stuff. And I'm too old for all
granola stuff.
There you go. But mine is more, sitting in a duck blind. And when I was young, it was up in a huge cypress tree. And this is probably a 300-year-old tree. And it's massive, and it's huge, and enough that we built a blind in the top of it. And so we're probably 80 feet off the water. And to sit there and to look as daylight breaks and, the sun begins to come up and that mist coming off the water. I mean, just as a boy, I love that. And so now, I'm busy. I don't get to hunt as much as my dad and brother do, but when I go back out there, now it's a cup of coffee and it's still looking at that same thing, even though it's not up in that original high tree. So I think it just did something inside of me to be a lover of what God has created. And everybody has their different thing that's beautiful to them. Louisiana, it's a bayou, it's a cypress tree, it's a Spanish moss hanging, as you're coming in the boat in the morning. It's things like that. And every place has its own beauty.
Mm-hmm.
I've traveled all over the world for mission stuff and all that. And, I can go to Gambia in Africa and travel there and look and see the beauty of every place, and so it's just a matter of being able to take care of it. And so I love that's, about what you guys do. And so that's kind of been a passion, of mine and our families for a long time. And we were young, we didn't have a lot. The business, wasn't going yet. And so we just had to, hunt on public land and do what we could do. And so the best part of being successful is being able to now own property to build and not only have, use our conservation techniques, but also to actually see and cultivate wildlife. And it's been amazing. It's been a great journey and a great blessing.
Well, I love that. And you talked a little bit about this at the summit, your kind of origin story of loving the outdoors and how much that has meant to your family. As someone who grew up in Wisconsin, I understood the importance of hunting and fishing for conservation because my grandparents and parents, had that experience. But for a lot of people, especially on the coasts or in big cities, they don't have that experience. And so, but yet they still care a lot about the environment. And therefore, they actually feel like hunting and fishing is antithetical to environmental protection.
Right.
Obviously, I understand the importance of that and believe in it as well. But can you explain, as if I was somebody who didn't understand that, why does it seem so backwards and why isn't it actually backwards? Why does it make sense for the hunting and fishing community to love the outdoors in itself? And also what does that community do for the outdoors? Those are kind of two different things, but I would love for you to touch on them.
And that's what intrigued me about, when you asked me to come speak, because you're right. I think a lot of people, you get it, and it's probably because of how you grew up, but so many people feels like they're at odds with the outdoor community, the hunting and fishing community. But you're right. It's a hand in glove. We should be doing this together, because if you don't have, wildlife habitable, outdoors, and you don't have clear streams and no pollution in the water, we can enjoy what we love to do. And so, we're all about a good example, Benji, is I remember the Corps of Engineers came over when we first bought our first kind of large piece of property. And of course, it was a wetland. So, there's certain things you have to go through. There's certain things you can do and not do on a wetlands, even if it's your own private property. And so the Corps of Engineers, the closest one, I think, to where we were was in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And so, a couple of Corps agents, or whatever they call themselves, came over. And so it was really interesting because they're so used to people buying land and then doing things to it that would, inhibit, wildlife development. And so they started looking around. They were like, I think we're going to be really close friends, because it's obvious you guys are trying to make this more habitable for all wildlife. And we were like, yeah, that's the whole purpose. And so I think sometimes it's that same idea. Like the government will think, well, these people are working against us, but we're not. We want to work together. I love it when the government has property that they allow people to use to harvest game. It's going to help the game. It's going to help all the deer herds. It helps everything to be able to manage it properly. And I probably didn't know as much about that until the last 20 years, about what it takes to manage wildlife, where things don't happen by disease and other things that can just wipe it out. And so we do want to work together with people. And you're right. I understand if you're from LA or, someone you've just never had that experience, but you do love the environment, that you would think you wouldn't sync up with some bearded guys down in Louisiana. But we really are on the same page. And when we first started our business, Benji, I don't know if I ever told you this, but we commercial fished the river. And so, we have a paper mill that's there probably 20 miles upstream. And of course, back in the day, They weren't regulated. They didn't have the proper system to filter what they were poured into our river, and they almost ruined it. And so, but we were some of the most outspoken people, along with a lot of other people living downriver, that said, you guys have to do something, about this. You're spoiling and ruining not only something that's beautiful that you shouldn't be, but also our livelihoods. And so they did. The government, of course, stepped in, but then there were a lot of public pressure as well, and a lot from the fishing and hunting community that said, this is right, and we love you being a job sponsor in our community, but at the same time, we want our community to be great. And they did. They fixed it. They built a baffling system of waterways that filters everything out, and so they're not putting pollution into the Ouachita River, which is one of the most beautiful rivers in America. So, we've been there this whole time, either by what we needed or what we had to have, and said, we're on the same page. We just need to think of really creative and good ideas that doesn't break the bank, that can help take care of the environment.
And that totally makes sense. And I also think, for a lot of people not understanding the incentive that a farmer, a hunter, an angler, somebody who they might see as being anti-environment actually has, because they rely on it to do the thing that they do for work, like for farming, or the thing that they love to do, like hunting or fishing. Obviously, that can be for work as well. That sometimes will make sense. But then the next question often is, well, especially around hunting and angling, if you care about it so much, then why kill the animals? And that is something that I never truly understood until I also went myself hunting and fishing. Can you, to the best of your ability, I mean, I know it's a lot of, it truly is something that you have to experience, but to the best of your ability, why do those things go hand in hand? Why do the actual acts of hunting and fishing, why does that actually grow your love for the environment? And what, if it's done right, does that actually do to help the environment?
Well, I mean, for one thing, and of course, this is where, philosophically, obviously, some people, from our perspective, we believe that game was put here along with all animals to be able to not only thrive themselves, but mainly it's a cycle, and so you see the cycle from the top down. And at this point, and there may be something that changes, but we seem to be at the top of the cycle, and we enjoy ducks, and we enjoy deer, and we enjoy squirrels, and I mean, almost everything. We grew up as both, nutrition for us, but also, a duck is nutrition for a lot of things. It's amazing. Of course, again, being a creationist, I believe there was a design, but you're talking about potholes and, waterways up in where you're from, and up into Canada, and, those ducks growing there. And then for whatever reason, they decide that they're going to all hightail it down south, for until it gets not as cold. And then they're going to go back, and they go back to the same places, and they breed, the same ways. And so there's just an inner beacon, but they're providing protein all the way down, and not just for people. Obviously, that's for coyotes and owls and birds of prey and a lot of other things as well. So it's a process of that. And so us as people, we're probably, the biggest consumers of different, kinds of game. But all that is not only done to help us, but it manages them as well, because that's what they're designed to do. I mean, that's whether you believe it's a design or you believe it just happened by way of chance or evolution, that's what they do. And so I think one of the things that people misunderstand about hunting and fishing is they see it as we're trying to deplete everything. But you're like, no, it's like forestry. If you don't, that's big in our area. If you don't grow trees back when you harvest trees, then you've lost that forever. And so, all of these things are managed to be able to not only have a greater use and a greater use for people, but also that you want it to extend and grow. I mean, you've said this a lot of times before. I mean, more trees on the planet is a good thing. I mean, that's helping us do so many different things. And from our perspective, you have to have that to be able to have the kind of game that we love to have and love to enjoy. My dad was, when he grew up, he was in the Red River Bottoms, which is over in kind of northwest Louisiana, north of Shreveport. And he tells a story, he was a teenager. They began clear cutting a lot of that Red River Bottom to farm, because it was obviously good farmland. But he really had a hard conscience. I mean, he needed the money, they were poor, and he needed the job. But I mean, he was in tears just having to clear cut those trees. And, some of that property and land has been now repopulated with trees, but for a long time, it was just the whole Red River just got stripped. And so it was his job to do it, but at the same time, he knew deep down in his heart, it wasn't the best way to do it and go about it. And this was probably back in the 60s. So, those things have impacted him, which therefore impacted us because we grew up hearing those stories and we understood why it was important to listen, listen to people that talk about different ways to have, a good environment and be able to have a healthy environment.
Well, I love that. And I was hoping you'd bring up the example about the need of kind of the sportsman community for kind of maintaining the balance of some of these populations. And this is something I was explaining to one of my friends who didn't understand the importance of hunting and fishing the other day was, just let the statement was just let them kind of get back to the way they were. You don't have to kill them off. Just let it restore itself on its own. And the reality is that maybe could work if humans weren't on this planet. But we are, right. And we've developed so much of the land that they lived on, for better or for worse, right? That's a whole different conversation. I would say for overall betterment, but the reality is there, and you can't have an overpopulation of deer in an area or an overpopulation of ducks or whatever, because it screws up the entire ecosystem. And because the things aren't completely natural in the way that they would be without humans, they can't just restore itself on its own. So not only do the hunting and fishing communities, fund a lot of these efforts through the taxes and the fees and the things that happen with the tagging and all of the processes around hunting and fishing. And not only does the hunting and fishing community love the environment because you guys spend so much time in it, and now I'm spending a lot of time doing those sorts of things, but also it's restoring balance to the ecosystem. Of course, there are bad hunters and bad fishermen out there who have bad intentions, but the vast majority of the hunting and fishing community solely wants balance in the ecosystem. That's right. So that we have ecosystems for generations to come. And you need to hunt or fish. Similarly, you need to manage a forest. And maybe for some people, it doesn't feel good to cut down a tree. And maybe for some people, it doesn't feel good to shoot a deer. But you have to do it to restore the balance of our ecosystems to a way that's healthy for the long-term success of that ecosystem. So I just think it's critical that you brought that up. And it's really difficult for a lot of people to understand that because, again, if you're living in a city, you already oftentimes feel like, oh, I'm encroaching on nature too much. We've built so much up here and all that. But that's why even the most liberal, if you're thinking about it politically, wildlife scientists and folks are always supportive of hunting and fishing and forest management and those sorts of things. So I guess, from your point of view, outside of those areas, where do you feel like people really misunderstand the hunting and fishing community? Is that kind of the bulk of it, do you feel like, or are there other areas where you feel like it's a misunderstood community?
Well, I think, like you said, I mean, some of it is just kind of, where you're from and kind of your experiences. And so if you've never experienced that, a good example of that is Kirk Cameron, the actor. He for some reason, I don't know how he got down to where we are, but he got there at some point. And he's from California, lifelong, never hunted, never fished. Obviously a good person, but so first time he goes out in the woods and he has his kids, at this time they were younger, this probably 10 years ago. And, they go out but they love it. I mean, and they loved it. So they were a skater, they like skateboarding and, city urban things, but they had never experienced it. And so to get out in the woods, to see wildlife and to be honest with you, I mean, we harvest game, but we watch wildlife more than we hunt wildlife. I mean, we love it. There's nothing like, to me, sitting in a deer blind and watching, 40 or 50 deer just, eat and do what they're doing. And it's amazing. It's just, you see these amazing animals. And so the first time he experienced that, and his kids did, they loved it. So the next year they came back and actually went on a hunt and got their license and paid their fees and all the things. And he's been coming every year ever since back to Louisiana, even if he's not with us, because it was an experience they never had. And so, again, I think a lot of times it's just a matter of a lifestyle you've never experienced. And maybe the only thing you got from it was something you saw on television Or like you said, maybe it was somebody that was bad that wasn't taking care of, of the environment or their hunting. They weren't doing it the right way. And so I think some of that is just a natural kind of blockade. It's like when I go to the city, I'm never super comfortable because I'm not used to that much concrete and that much noise. And so it's just, I'm never comfortable there. I remember the first time I went to New York for the show, and it was early on, and we just, the show was really taking off. And so we're having to go and do all this public relations stuff in the family. And so Dad, he is super uncomfortable, and so we go into New York. And so, we do our thing and we do our shows. And so as I think we'd flown into New Jersey, into Newark. And so when we crossed a river and we get into Jersey, and it's a little more like what we're used to before we got to the airport, just at least it looked that way. I literally looked over at Dad and saw him like exhale, like for the first time in 3 days we were there, he could breathe. And it's because we're not, familiar with that experience. Right. And yet, obviously, there's a lot of great people in New York, and a lot of friends of ours are there. So sometimes it's just experiencing other things you're not used to and realizing that, you don't necessarily have to be against or for something. You just may not know that much about it. And so I think people like you and other people help bridge those gaps, because you're having people talk to each other, about their experiences, but we're all trying to do the exact same thing. And that's been our passion, like I told you. And I love what you said about the generational thing, because, my dad is 76, and, for the first time we're realizing that, most of his years are behind him. And, he may still have a few more good years, but it's getting harder and harder just to go hunt and to, just the physical toll that it takes on him. And, I'm getting close to 60, and now I'm looking at my grandsons, and I want to create and provide something that they can enjoy, that I enjoyed as a young boy, like my grandson is now, for the rest of his life, and then his children and their children. And so that's the sort of thinking that really makes change and really preserves what we have. And so you want that to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations, and as much as possible. We're even building our property into a trust that we don't ever want it sold. We want it to stay in our family and provide what we've been provided for generations. And I know things will change, population grows and ebbs and flows, but, we want that our little 2,000 acres of our little heaven down there to be available for future Robertsons, as far as it can be. So that's part of this mindset. And so, we just need to talk about that to be able to help make it happen.
I love that. And it's that personal stake that the hunting and fishing community has, because unless you don't care about the future, which pretty much every person I've met in the sportsman community does immensely, you're far worse off if the environment is worse off. Right. And there's a direct correlation between your, love for the environment and the success of the environment, allowing you to continue doing your hobbies as a sportsman. And that is a direct alignment that, again, doesn't click with many people. So I'm glad we covered that. And I think you also alluded to kind of the next thing I want to talk to you about, which is kind of the rural urban divide. I mean, I grew up in a more rural area. It was a suburban town surrounded by suburban sized town surrounded by farms. And my whole family basically grew up there. And I didn't understand the way that a city person thought until I moved out to Seattle for college, and, have now seen that through my work, like you said, in cities like New York and others. But there is this really big disconnection. I'm glad that you acknowledged the kind of feeling that you had going into a city, because I also felt that way for a really long time before kind of living in one for a while. And I feel like that's actually, it's not even political really at the heart of where the disconnect on the environment is. It's almost rural and urban, is it not? I mean, is it people in urban areas feeling like they know how to make decisions environmentally that don't understand what we were talking about earlier, similar to rural people not understanding, what urban areas can and could do for themselves? I mean, can you talk a little bit about that and what your stance is and how the division is like it is today on the environmental issues, and maybe how that plays into it?
Yeah, that's a salient point. I mean, I think, and we need both. I mean, I think there are great things that come out of an urban setting. I'm not one of those that's just big cities, it's terrible.
Right.
There's a lot of innovation. There's a lot I enjoy. I love when I go to New York. I love going to theater. I love to see shows. I love to see talented people, doing what they do. And so, some of the best chefs in the world, are in big cities, and so I enjoy that. And I really think that urban people, if they had a chance to experience more of rural, America, would probably appreciate it as well. A lot of people will find themselves in a setting where maybe it's family somewhere and it's a different kind of experience. We had a musical. I mean, in our crazy years of all these things about our family, there was a musical called the Duck Commander musical.
Did you
Faith.
sing?
I didn't. No, it wasn't us. It was professional people. But it opened in Vegas of all places, and it didn't last a long time there because it just wasn't quite the connection. I mean, I think that what they thought was weren't sure about New York, but they for sure thought, well, Vegas, all these people come from the Midwest, they'll go see this musical. But the problem is people don't go to Vegas to really see wholesome stories about this Louisiana family. But there were these two guys. Actually, there was a team that wrote the music, and it was fabulous. I can't tell you how good it was. And again, it's from a person who's been to a lot of musicals. But the guys, they're twins, and they're Broadway musicians. They're fantastic. I mean, they're so talented. And they met our family. And of course, they'd never really met anybody like us. And of course, we became fast friends with a lot of the cast and a lot of the musicians. And so they would wind up in Louisiana, just for the feel of the family and figure it all out when they were working on this project. And since that time, that's been about almost 10 years ago, they've been coming back to Louisiana every summer. They bring their kids go to summer camp there at our little camp that we have. And then they usually stay about 2 weeks. And then they go back because they're like, as much as we love it here, enjoy the experience, we miss the sounds and the flavor. We're New Yorkers, but they have an appreciation that they never would have had had we not cross connected. And now it's a part of their lives. And so, and when they're back in New York doing what they love to do, we go there, of course, we connect and we spend time with them. But it's just, I wish we could have a way to do that more and more to really understand the differences in the two. And instead of it being a clash, it could be a really a mutual enjoyment of what both bring to the table. And so, I'm a rural guy. I grew up in a small town, Louisiana, obviously, but I understand that people can be xenophobic and, again, say all cities are bad and, there's riots everywhere and they're so dangerous, and in the news, feeds into that even more when it's really not that way. There's a lot of good people everywhere you go. So I hope we can continue to do that. I think a lot of people that get out of the city and get out into the country love it. I think if you have the right mindset, you can go into the city and enjoy and the history of places the same way. So I hope that continues to, I wish that would melt more instead of grow more into a divide. And I don't know, like I said, I think a lot of people make a lot of money on trying to keep that divide there. And so, unfortunately, that's kind of part of what it is, especially on the political side.
Yeah, I mean, it pains me a lot to hear those arguments because I do feel like it's actually happening more and more. As much as I would like to say that maybe we're heading in the other direction, which there have been some steps in that, which I'll talk about in a second. But you hear all that when I go to New York, which I go to pretty frequently for work. I'll go back and even people who I love will say, "Oh, you must have just had to watch your back at every moment. What was it like? Where was everything boarded up?" And it's like, no, it has, it's nowhere near as bad as what you're talking about. There's always been crime in New York, and of course there's bad policies, and that's a whole different subject that make things better or worse. But the level of disdain of you're saying oh, there's riots, it's just a bunch of oversensitive people and they're just trying to come for us, and all those kind of stereotypes are often wrong. Just when I tell people that I grew up in Wisconsin, I often am met on the coasts with, "Oh wow, you grew up in Wisconsin? That must have sucked. And I'm like, no, I would absolutely move back there. I mean, I love that state and I go back there as much as I can. I'm just a 20-something-year-old trying to see different parts of the country because I am trying to see different parts of the country. But I mean, it's amazing. I bring people either from my team, because I'm the president of the organization. We did a retreat with a little over 20 of our staff in Wisconsin a couple months ago. A lot of them had preconceived notions of the state, and they walked away saying, I love this state and I would love to come back. They would have never gone there or even considered going there if I didn't pretty much force them to. But I mean, my friends the same way. I mean, I have friends in Seattle who will come and visit Wisconsin, and they're so shocked by how beautiful it is. So all these kind of conceptions and it's ugly, or, people are all racist or rude or whatever. It's just, there's so many wrong assumptions on both sides of that. And it bleeds over so much to the environmental side of things because, the cities are, trying to do this high tech stuff around electric vehicles and solar and all these things. And, you might have an opinion on electric vehicles or solar, but a lot of these cities are making it work for them. But rural areas don't think that it can work at all because it doesn't work in their community. Just like an urban area doesn't understand that it can't just be 100% widespread because it doesn't work in the rural community.
Right.
And to me, that's at the core of where these problems break down. Do you agree that there are some significant problems on the urban-rural divide as it pertains to the environment, or do you feel like it is more political?
That's a great question. I think it's probably some of both. I think it's way more political than anything, but I do think you're right. I think it's on the environmental side, you see that as well, because you described it perfectly. I mean, you have to have a lot of horsepower in terms of engines and machinery and different things you use to farm and to do what happens, especially in the Midwest. And that's you don't need any of that stuff. In the city, because you're trying to get around best you can. It's overcrowded. There's probably too many cars already. And so you're trying to make it as utilitarian as possible. And you're right. It makes perfect sense to have smaller, better emissioned vehicles and things like this to make life better. And so to recognize that both ways. And I think that's really the way forward. And I've never asked you this, but I'm assuming, since you are not afraid to call yourself conservative, that you're probably, a lot of people look at you in the environment you're in and saying, well, this guy, what has he got to bring to the table? Because if you're not left leaning or left, there's no way you can even understand it, but you do, get it. And so I think that's a bright hope. That's why I've followed you and your organization so closely, because I think it will be conservatives that bring everybody to the table and says, look, because the conservatives have kind of ignored it, even the faith community, which is a big part of obviously what I've been in, because we believe there's a creator. So we trust in God who created everything. It's made us very lackadaisical as a people in America, I think, as to not take it seriously and to not say, look, he just because there's a creator, we're here to steward that creation. And so our job is to make it as great as possible for everybody. And you don't have to be a believer to be able to enjoy what God has created. So I think, that we need to be inspired, to be a part of that as well. So I think the more you see conservatives rise up and say, we want to be at the table talking about practical ways to do this, the better. And so since urban, and not everywhere, but since urban tends to be, especially coastal urban, tends to be bluer, you have that divide. But again, see, it goes back to politics. Instead of saying, but we can agree that we all want a cleaner, better planet. And we want to, with streams that are full of fish and full of all kinds of an ecosystem that's fantastic for everything that's enjoying it, not just people. So that's where we have to get to, I think, in a bigger way. And you guys are going to help do it, because what I love about your youth is that you're going to be here talking about this, for the next 50 years. And hopefully growing up other people alongside you that'll be part of that discussion. So yes, I think there is some environmental difference, but I think if we look at it and what's the best for every area and not just try to necessarily shoehorn one particular philosophy onto everybody, I think we'll do fine. We'll do great. America's doing so much better than people are led to believe. I mean, you look at other countries that are really, having a lot of issues with not taking care of the environment. And I mean, we need to be leaders. I agree with that 100%. I don't necessarily agree with all the ways that some people are trying to get us there, but I definitely am all for making it the best possible place we can be.
I completely agree. And we'll talk about a couple of, broad ways of how we can get there in a few minutes. But before we do that, I think the conversation you just kind of touched on around the political and kind of this, it's the different geographies of this country or the world breed a different view on environmental, issues. If you live near the coasts, you care about coastal issues. If you live in the Midwest, you care more about farming and lake issues. And all those issues are different. And so this kind of one size fits all approach that we hear about just doesn't work. And I think a lot of times people in cities compare themselves and say, hey, if it worked in LA, it can work in New York, or if it worked in Chicago, it can work in Atlanta. And maybe that is true for those cities, but for the, there probably are a lot of differences even there that, people wouldn't realize. But outside of those cities, the geographies are vastly different, and you cannot put these blanket kind of situations on them. And that's where I feel like the Democratic Party, the left-leaning side of this issue, I of course have my problems with the right side of it, as the organization was founded to get them to the table. But that's where the left, has really screwed up this issue, is just this inability to understand where rural people are coming from, understand where conservative people are coming from, and understand that this is so much more complex than what, Boston can do is what the rest of Massachusetts can do. And it's pretty hard in a state as small as Massachusetts. Imagine a state, like Montana or Texas. It just gets a lot more complicated depending on where you're at. So I think that misunderstanding or lack of understanding that comes from a lot of these decision makers is a big reason why we haven't made any progress, because the moment those things are tried, they don't work. And we're seeing that happen still today with these kind of blanket ideas. But I love what you said about kind of where conservatives should be heading. And I would love to just, have you talk a little bit about, if you're a young person who has been, doesn't really see themselves as far left, you're left of center, middle, or right of center, you care a lot about the environment, you feel a little bit disenfranchised by the way the right has handled these issues, what would you tell them as to why they should care if conservatives engage? You hinted at it a little bit, but why would it matter if conservatives engage? Why not just buy into the left, the left's ideas, or try to, if the left's ideas are bad, spear them, in the right direction? Why conservatives, and why would that matter?
Well, I think one of the reasons why is because you're talking about, basically half of the population. And when they're disengaged on any issue, that's not good. Because, you're talking about resources and people's ability to come up with creative solutions. If we just kind of get in our side camps like we've done in politics and kind of created what we see now, where every election cycle is down to this, thin margin, and then you run back into your camps and you don't really progress in terms of getting things done, that hasn't been healthy at all. So we see the picture of unhealth, and I think you could apply that to environmental issues for sure. And so I think it is important to engage. And so you're right, you're going to find things. I mean, I think for a long time on the Republican side or the right side, because it was pro-business, a lot of issues, like that, pro-commerce. And so it became, well, they don't care about the environment because all they care about is building big factories and big things that are going to, do bad things to the environment. And there was probably some truth in that, in terms of not regulating when regulation needs to happen. The government should be that arm that looks out for everybody. It's interesting because when you think about hunting, from our perspective, it's mostly state-driven, state legislature, state laws. But, ducks and geese fly across all the states. And so the federal government, because they're migratory, just like the interstate system or anything like that, so the government is in charge of regulating conservation for ducks from top to bottom, from, when you start on the U.S. border all the way down to when you get to Mexico. And so it's really interesting because when farmers were farming right up to wetlands and little ponds and little low areas in their fields, ducks couldn't grow because, too many predators were getting them. So the government stepped in and says, you have to have a buffer around there. Well, hunters way down where I am in Louisiana, we cheered that because we thought that's what we want. We want, us working together. We want farmers still farming, but we leave a little room for those ducks to grow and nest. And so that's the sort of kind of thing when you're talking about engaging, you have to engage all sides together and on any issue and figure out how can we do this, in a bipartisan way to have solution. Well, if you don't engage one side, you're never going to have that again. And not just I'm not trying to just pat you on the back the whole podcast, but I'm telling you, Benji,
I'll take it.
Your work is so important because you're willing to engage on the left because you're going to have far more left people that you're going to engage with about environmental issues than you are on the right, even though you're bringing more to the table. So it's people that are willing to enter the fray and try to bring all people to an understanding of the importance of the issue that matters. And so I think that's, if you just punt, if you just say, okay, I don't care about the lefties or I don't care about those people on the right, then you're going to find yourself in a place that's not going to have much progress and you're not going to have many solutions. And I love what you said. You're right. These are complex issues. These aren't just easy things, and for a lot of different reasons. And so I think we have to, move forward saying we got to do the best job we can possibly do.
Yeah. And I love that because it just shows that when you don't sit at the table, your voice isn't heard, and because they're so complex and they're it's such a diverse issue set compared to even like taxes or something. This is affecting everybody in a different way. Environmental issues. If you're if your community with its own environmental issues and ecological systems aren't being represented, then they're losing because no one is representing them at the table. And I'm a firm believer that you will always be able to find common ground with somebody on something. And on this issue, there actually is a ton, and we just don't even try. And that's where the biggest, honestly, frustration probably in my life has come from so far, has been seeing to the severity, how bad that problem is. Because I thought it was bad when I started this organization, but the more that I get to know liberal, conservative, and, non kind of political people, the more I realize how much common ground there actually is, but we're all talking past each other with these assumptions based on things we've already talked about in this conversation that just muddle our ability to go anywhere further. And it makes us all worse off because not only do we all share the same planet and share the same air and share the same water, but we also all have our own environmental issues that we need solved. And the more that we delay them all because we're not at the table, because we're bickering, because we're talking past each other, it sounds like kumbaya talk, but it just is true. And maybe that's not possible to do that sort of dialogue on a different topic right now, but on this one it should be. And that's where, the idea of what we're trying to do is right now. But climate change is obviously the hot button topic that partially started the divide to where it is right now. And without getting too much into the issue itself, I would love for you to kind of, on the topic of this, talk a little bit about where you think the left and the right have gone wrong on that topic of climate change that seems to be, on the top of a lot of people's minds because they're scared of what the policies are going to do, or because they're scared that the policies aren't doing enough.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. I think the biggest issue on both sides is, on the left, everything that happens in a bad way is a result of climate change. And on the right, so you don't want to be that guy. On the right, you're like, so nothing is affecting climate. Like it's all, bunk, and it's all, you shouldn't worry about any of this stuff. So that's the two extreme positions. Obviously, the truth is in the middle, where there are things that you're seeing that are happening that we should be looking for solution, whether it's things we can control or things we can't. Obviously, some we can. And so I think that's where you have to find the commonality. Because I'm like that. Every time there's a hurricane or something bad happens, it's not necessarily, I mean, there's always been a lot of these things that happen. So it's not necessarily the result of what climate change is, but certainly the climate is changing. And if you're just one of these people that just say, I'm a climate denier is what they call you, but where you say nothing, there's obviously a lot of problems that we should be looking at in big ways. Some of the ideas you have come up, like reparation most recently, and some of these other things. I mean, most people are just like, how could we possibly afford this? But we do need to have resources that go into create clean environment for everybody. And so, to deny that is not healthy. And so you're right. I think there's been on both sides of the aisle, there's certainly been, whether it's too much, everything, the sky's falling, or you shouldn't be worried about any of this stuff. Who cares? Neither one of those is healthy and good for us. And so we have to be able to, again, have a decent conversation, at what can we do? What can we concretely do? We are a wealthy people, and we should be using a lot of our resources to make our planet better. Primarily, we're going to be the most concerned about the continental U.S. I mean, because this is our home. This is where we live. This is what we protect. But the other parts of the planet also obviously have an impact on that. We understand that from a geopolitical standpoint. So why would we understand that from an environmental one? So obviously what you'd like to see in the future is sometimes you see these populist or conservative, governments rise in different nations. I'd love to see them be right up front with saying, okay, we're not going to do some of the things you're laying out because we think that's kind of crazy, but here's what we will do. Here's what we can do. Here's what we're offering. And so I think if you started seeing that more, maybe you'd see more of a working together. Because the way it is now, it's almost all left. A lot of the world leaders get together and they are trying to do some things, but again, you're leaving half of the population out of the conversation.
That's exactly right. And I think, your point about everything's due to climate change or nothing is happening at all. That actually speaks to so many threads that we've talked about just in the last, 30 minutes or whatever this has been, because it's this all or nothing approach. It's all one way or it's all the other way. And, it's all rural people are bad, so I'm not going to listen to that. All urban people are bad, I'm not going to listen to that. It's all junk science or it's all going to kill us tomorrow. It's just, we keep getting further and further into those corners, which is a stressful place to be because those positions are not fun positions to have. I mean, if you hate all urban areas, that's a lot of people you hate. And if you hate all rural areas, it's a lot of people to hate. And if you think all junk science is, then you're going to be scared of every policy around climate change. And if you think that, climate change is going to kill us tomorrow, then of course that's stressful as heck too. And there's so much wrong with us moving into those corners. And I think both sides are to blame on the climate side because, they find that it's just way easier to go to the opposite end of where the other side is. And so they keep going further and further into that. And, maybe that person who's saying that extreme statement or the party that's doing it is better off in the short term. But, we're all worse off because we're not having that, discourse, and we're not talking about balanced solutions. We're just talking about crazy rhetoric that, doesn't really help anyone out. And we're currently there, but I think we're getting closer to a place where at least there are some people, basically leaving that divide and trying to find some sort of synergy, even if it's only a percentage of the time. So we're limited on time, speaking of time. And before I give you a moment to say a few final words, I have a few rapid fire questions for you that I think should be pretty fun. And then we'll wrap up after that. But if you're ready to go, I'll hit you with them.
Hit me with it.
All right. Favorite breed of duck?
My favorite is the green-winged teal. I've always thought it was the most beautiful bird. It's the best to eat because they have a rice diet, but they're beautiful. The male is just quite simply the most beautiful duck to me.
Well, those ducks better watch out because that you just made it pretty appealing for those who are interested in duck hunting. Most underrated southern state.
Most underrated southern state. I would say probably Mississippi. Because, I have a place in Alabama and in Louisiana, and they both have, they're well known for a lot of different reasons, but a lot of people don't know a lot about Mississippi, but there are some fantastic people there that live in that state. And they've had some really more innovative things than people give them credit for. They're low in some categories that I know they want to do better in, but it's a good state with a lot of good people, especially along the coastal area where I am.
Love that. Okay. Favorite dessert. And this is coming because there's a rumor that, you've owned a store with your wife called Missy K's Sweets and Treats. So I'm going to need you to, you have a lot of knowledge about this. So this is an important answer.
So my personal favorite is my mom's coconut pie. Since I was a kid, it was just the fave. I mean, it's kind of like almost a banana pudding center. So obviously it's got coconut in it. And banana pudding is another high one on the list, but I would say coconut pie is probably my favorite. What's interesting now is mom is kind of getting older, and so she doesn't do as many things. But now my daughters and granddaughters are all cooking her recipes, and so it's been kind of fun to see now the two generations of Miss K's famous recipes being passed on to the future. So we're going to fatten people in our family into the next 2 or 3 generations. So.
Hey, if it tastes good, it is good. That's the right. Philosophy that you just got to live by. All right, 2 more. Best outdoors wear brand.
Well, since we're under contract, I guess I would probably.
I swear they didn't tell us. I don't even know who it is. I would
have to say Under Armour and Realtree. But actually, all of the stuff now is so great compared to stuff from 40 years ago. But it's so much the way they go about design now through pictures and obviously 3-dimensional imaging and 4-dimensional imaging. It makes it look so good. I mean, and I've been in the woods before and seen people wearing, a lot of different kinds, but especially the Realtree stuff that literally, if they don't move, you can't see them. You never know they're there. So it, like everything else, technology has made it a lot better.
Yeah, I've become a big Under Armour fan over the last few years, especially with how much they're dedicating resources into the United States and trying to do that for a whole host of reasons. But also, by the way, that's pretty sustainable. Okay, last question. Most attractive Robertson. And this is inspired by a comment you made at the summit.
Well, of course, it would have to be me, but my brothers might argue, but I probably said this at the thing. My wife says that I'm the best looking Robertson, which I appreciate. Anytime your wife says that, but I do have to.
It'd be great. It's better than her saying that your brothers are more attractive than
exactly. You. And I realize the bar is very low, so I'm stepping over a low bar to say I'm the best looking Robertson. That's not too hard when you look like my family does.
Hey, well, that's I definitely disagree with that, but I love that. And it's a good line because, someone's got to boast it. And if your wife said it, then it's true.
There you go.
That's what I've learned. So, well, that is amazing. And this whole conversation was amazing. I've really enjoyed it. And truly, I mean, your leadership just wanting to engage on this issue is appreciated beyond belief because so many people aren't willing to sit at the table because of different stereotypes and understandably. And, obviously we wish it wasn't that way, but you represent such an important community of people who love nature and have followed you for, now decades, who care deeply about it too. And you stepping into this arena, even just speaking at the summit, coming on this podcast, and I know you do so much else in your personal life to just love and support the outdoors. It just means the world and it means the world to me, but it also, I'm sure will mean the world to the audience listening to this. And it meant the world to our activists this past summer. So I truly appreciate it.
Well, you having me come, I appreciate it because I want people in the communities that I spend the most time in, the faith community and the hunting and fishing community, to understand the importance of this issue. Because I think it's, like I said earlier, it's easy for us to not be engaged and to be supportive of groups like yours that are really on the front line of having these conversations, of making a difference, and of engaging all sides. And so I hope to see your group inspire more groups that are willing to, just be upfront about being a conservative, but at the same time being somebody that loves what God has created. And so I think we have to be supportive of that, be aware of that more, and be engaged more in any way, whether it's to, provide resources for it or just, lend our voices to say we're supportive. We're behind you guys 100%.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself, and I'm truly excited to keep working with you in the years to come and continuing our hopefully budding friendship. And thanks again for being here. Onward, my friend.
Yeah, you're very welcome, and I appreciate you growing that mustache. You know, you're gonna work yourself into a beard as you grow into your maturity.
If I'm lucky, by the time I'm 75, I'll have a beard.
That's awesome.
Thanks again.
All right, buddy.
And before we jump, the Coming Clean podcast is grateful to be powered by Ørsted, a wonderful company strengthening America's energy security with reliable and domestic clean energy. Through its integrated renewable energy solutions, Ørsted is creating American jobs, investing in American communities, and driving American innovation, all while preserving our country's natural habitats. A clean energy future truly connects us all, and Ørsted is helping lead the charge. To learn more, visit us.orsted.com.